Welcome, everybody. We have some people from around the country here as we wait for Jeff to pop on video. But wanted to welcome you all. We have an awesome webinar for you today. 5 strategies to drive revenue for ops. This is our sponsor, Affinities. So we're going to talk about the Revenue Leaders Playbook. I have a few incredible revenue leaders here. Want to give a shout out to Affinity, our incredible sponsor, for hosting this, and wanted to introduce you to this phenomenal panel. I am not worthy, but I'm going to try to keep up. So we have Natalie Marco Tullio. How did I do?
Perfect.
Perfect. Head of growth at Novatic. We have, I'm going with the hard names first here. Jake Pugsatic. How'd I do?
Very good.
Oh, man. 1 for 2. The VP of sales at Affinity, and Jake Rennie, the softball to finish. Chief Growth Officer at Revenue Reimagined. How are you all today?
Awesome.
All right, let's jump in. So some ground rules for everybody. We have an hour here. If you have questions, ask it in the chat. We want to hear everything. We have a really awesome schedule here that we're going to go through, 7 or so questions that I'm excited to dive into. But if we have time at the end, we definitely want to take some of the audience's questions as well. But the goal of this conversation, we want to speak to operations teams and hear the perspectives of the revenue leaders, right? And we're going to see if we can't have some really good executable strategies and tactics that'll help you when managing your teams and in your org. So jumping right in, finding paths to revenue is more challenging than ever, right? We're in 2024. This is not 2014 anymore. Cold calling and other tactics aren't as effective as they once were. And we can't really rely on inbound. What are the biggest sales challenges you're facing right now? Natalie.
To kick off, this is going to be surprising to no one, but I think CFO buy-in. So we've noticed obviously like a little bit of drop this year as far as interest, but nothing too crazy. Like I think marketers are still overall excited about interactive demos, want to try them out, but we'll get, almost like the 1 yard line, we'll get super close, trying to use a sports metaphor there. And then the CFO or CEO will cut it off last minute and say, but have we tried it in an entirely free way? Or have we tried it in a way that's, like, even if we know it's a worse experience, have we tried it in a way that is a little like something that we just can do right away for free? So I think there's just a lot of hesitancy around buying right now. And that attitude that CFOs are giving off of it's hard to get thing approved are also making people a little more hesitant to want to even ask for buy-in. So I think really proving that ROI and showing why it's maybe worth spending a little more or why we should take action, even if like the marketer is on board, having to sell then also to the CFO and CEO.
The CFO being a stakeholder is kind of new in the last couple of years, right?
Yeah, especially like we don't have huge, we're not doing like crazy deal sizes. So I think the fact that CFOs are coming in like 6K annual deals, like everything's being really scrutinized.
And to give context where this question's from, like, can you share a little bit about your ICP from like a size standpoint where the CFOs are coming in, as well as roughly your average contract value?
Yeah, so I mentioned like anywhere between 6 to about 12K ACV, and generally it is marketers we're working with. So demand gen, growth marketers, product marketers. But I think it's, you'll get the information about the product about the actual marketer. You'll get to see where they came from, what they're interested in, but maybe not as having much context into the entire org or data around, again, like the CFO or CEO.
Understood. And Jeff, what are the biggest challenges you're seeing?
Yeah, a little different. And before I hit that, like I'm going to defend the phone until the day I die. The phone's not dead. It depends on your industry, right? And
sure.
ultimately conversion. So like we see like 8 to 12% call connect rate. Obviously, you got to follow the funnel there. But the bigger issue related to the phone is specific to like the last 10 years have been a gold rush, right? So a lot of the skill sets needed, right, from the individual contributor level maybe haven't been formed, right, because you've been reliant on some of these other sources, which gets me to the bigger point, which is around it's all pipe gen. Looking at it internally, like as I talk to leaders across the space, it's all about how do I get sufficient pipeline coverage? And ultimately, when I kind of walk that back, like what that means to me is getting better insights of what you have in relation to your data, right? So how do you surface up stronger signals to your team to drive stronger relationships, to do easier outbound, right? Not cold outbound, but warm outbound. And there's so many providers, but then how do you systematize that to create a cohesive, consistent motion that you could drive over a period of time? That way it doesn't ebb and flow, but it's all pipeline and pipe gen and related to surfacing up the insights that the individuals need to be successful.
I love that. So just diving into the challenge part of that, what's the most difficult part are you seeing on the team?
Yeah, the hardest part is like it's really easy to make these decisions in silos and to go buy a solution and to roll it out, but ultimately you need the buy-in from the field, right? Of how are we going to execute this and how do you bring it to life? Because there's so much tool fatigue, right, that goes into this. And great, we're going to add all these different sources. Let's do back of the napkin. We can generate X amount more pipeline, but end of the day, does it fit within the workflow, what the individual contributor, AE, BDR, whoever is trying to accomplish? And then within their scope of work, like, can we carve out time to then execute, right? If we're expecting to get way more intent signals, for example, or we're driving more relationships for ultimately people we know in our network, right? Okay, what's the overall outbound strategy? And is it cohesive or is it individuals that are doing greatness, right? And as you have individuals doing like points of greatness, like that creates a system of air, right? Of you're only as good as your top performer. So standardizing that across the board, kind of incorporating the enablement, the operations side of the house to make this cohesive, repeatable, and measurable.
No hero ball, like let me do a basketball reference here. The Sixers, they have two people and nobody else. The Knicks are coming in. I'm a Knicks fan, so pardon me. But Jake, what are you seeing as well?
Yeah, a couple things. Yeah, actually, so building off of both what Natalie and Jeff said here, and Natalie talked more about like the challenge on the end of the deal, trying to get things closed, and the decision makers that now being pulled in, the CFO, and Jeff talking about pipeline coverage. The top of the funnel, we see with a lot of our clients, the challenge that's more pronounced now than I've ever seen before is the cost of acquisition for top of funnel. Just the sheer cost that it takes to just pull a lead in from an inbound perspective. There's just more competition from the bidding on the ad spend piece of this, and the cost of ad spend is just going up and up and up and up and up. A lot of people are turning to SEO, but that's just a long game. So there's a lot of our startups are trying to figure out how do we pivot to find ways to acquire inbound or just lead generation outside of what we've been doing, because that's just not financially like working anymore. But that's then leading to another problem that I think is like very pronounced in general that plays into making this more efficient is the data itself is very problematic, because now as Jeff is calling out, the tool fatigue. Well, there's so many cool tools out there right now, and all these cool tools in the tech stack that can help with the sales motion and the marketing motion. The challenge is now all of this disparate data that we need to actually drive better top of funnel. The data itself is just creating this mess, and it's therefore like contributing to the cost.
It's so funny. I've been talking, about unifying GTM. We all have, right? Like from a position standpoint, but the tooling we use isn't unified. It's siloed,
right.
And the irony isn't lost on me or us, right? So that's interesting. Now, jumping into the kind of data, I know Jeff and Jake touched on this, especially. What kind of data do you use to identify opportunities, prioritize accounts, and improve sales outreach? Jake, do you want to take this to start? Like what are you seeing?
Yeah, sure. No, I think what I get most excited about seeing right now, becoming more and more pronounced in the topic, is more and more accounts trying to leverage a lot of the data that they have around signal-based insights, engagement-based insights. And so moving from just like the traditional, hey, let's build a list off of maybe demographic, firmographic, technographic data, that we're actually getting some real insights directly based off of buyer signals and behaviors. That to me is super powerful, because we're getting to the right buyers at the right time, in the right place, that are trying to solve these problems in real time. And that's when the powerful conversation happens, is when we're talking to the right person about the right topic.
Jeff, what would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I think one just call out that I think has changed over the last couple of years as like teams have gotten leaner, right? Like the emphasis on the AE's day or the BDR's day was like, oh, they have all the time in the world. We're very well staffed. We're thinking about like how fast we're growing. And then as teams have gotten leaner, right, like more has been put on those individuals, whether it's full cycle, right, or they're contributing more of their own pipeline. So I think the first thing I would say is like solutions, tools, processes that can help automate some of the workflow for the rep to focus on like revenue facing activities, whether it's on the pipe gen, top of funnel, mid funnel and execution, or ultimately land and expand motion. So I think more or less like Jake's spot on this, but it's like really the time spent when I think about it, because you just got to do, again, like I hate saying less with more, but at the same time, when I think about like the intent signals, right, you can go buy countless solutions and layer this data in. But if you don't have the capacity to ultimately do that, and a lot of people, I'm guessing in this room, like that's a challenge, right? Of how do I scale my motion, whatever it be, with less people. So I think thinking it from like the individual's perspective, and then working off of that, of like what's realistic, and then buying solutions that can map and tie back to that, whether it's, you know, intent signals, buyer signals, relationship signals. Like, there's all sorts of signals out there.
Yeah, I love that. And Natalie, your point of view, running growth, I'm curious, and I love having a couple different types of personas on here to see how it overlaps.
Yeah, I think we talked about like one tool being unified. What can get really powerful is when we have these signals, but to your point, marketing and sales is acting on them. So for example, for us, when we're doing outbound campaigns to different types of intent signals, it's also feeding into a master list in HubSpot, and they're getting retargeted with LinkedIn ads. So I think as far as making all of your spend more efficient, if it's just the sales team reaching out to these signals over here, and then the marketing team focusing on their own signals and not combining them together, then everyone's just kind of going in different directions and wasting a lot of money, versus having it all streamlined in one place. And then you also get the feedback loop faster of sales says, oh, this feedback signal is working, or this signal is working really well. Marketing prioritizes that versus wasting their money on a signal that might not be as important.
Now, yeah, so we kind of touched on this, but how are you capturing all that data, and in what ways do you surface it to sales? And then what kind of data or insights do you think are missing or could be better? Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing for me is there has been like a push the last couple of years on intent signals. And there's lots of providers, but the biggest thing that's missed is around the relationship piece. So there's tons of vendors out there that can help support this, of who knows who and where within their network, essentially. So it's not necessarily chasing what people are doing across the web and scraping it together, but can we go a layer deeper, right? It's about who knows who and how to connect to, again, drive a warmer conversation. And it's not necessarily always like opportunity driven, right? It's you give, but you build these relationships that ultimately end up being, whether it's a referral or an opportunity, nonetheless, it's being able to contribute back based off of your network. And you know, as these companies, it's really hard to map out who knows who where, right? Typically those things live in LinkedIn, and it's hard to back into that. So I think that's one signal that we've definitely like layered into our business, and we'll continue to emphasize.
Are you seeing that too, Jake?
Oh yeah, it's interesting. You know, the vendor data game is not new, right? Like from old school, the data knives, to everyone kind of consolidating up into Zoom Info, and then you've got some new players in the market. Like, they continue to grow because I think everyone's still frustrated that the data continues to be lacking, and we spend a lot of money. These platforms aren't cheap, right? Like, we spend a lot of money trying to get like real buyer data and insight, like contact information, and then you put your sellers out to work based on these lists that they're building, and then like the numbers don't work and the emails are bouncing, and it's super frustrating that this data still lacks. But that's why it gets me really excited when I start seeing a lot of the near bound discussions or the community based discussions, like the referral discussions, because leveraging your network and their network, and like I think it's just like it has a compound or even an exponential impact on the way that we can move quickly with relationships that are warm and contact that we can trust, like data that we can trust. And so I think you can counteract that with some of these new focuses on community-led efforts.
Natalie, what are you doing or seeing in addition to that?
Yeah, I think to the point of like anything a little more human of a signal. And the nice thing too is when it is like, can you reach out to this person you know, or maybe a job change, or maybe a promotion? It's something that you can kind of fact check yourself, hopefully. Because there's nothing worse to a point, like there's so many providers and sometimes the data isn't 100% accurate. And it's really uncomfortable if you send something like, you know, congrats on the new job and they didn't get a new job, or congrats on a recent round of funding and that's not accurate. So I really like the idea of having that personal connection, because you also do have that gut check of like, our data is right. We're making sure it's coming from a place really of building in that connection, versus I think it's a little obvious when you're doing really mass outreach around some intent signals. And then when it's not right, I think that just can harm the relationship.
Yeah, I think I personally see the space evolving so much towards community and LinkedIn and social. When I started in sales, when I really started, I had a phone book. I didn't know anybody in that, right? Like probably maybe some of you started after, but even along the way, you had your ICP list you were going after, and then you layered in triggers. But now you're having engaging conversations on social media, on LinkedIn, and you're actually getting to know people. So like, how can you layer in, you know, with your ICP, the people that might be related or that might actually be in it, and like connect those dots? I always think that could be done better and more interesting, and like what's happening in Rev Genius and Slack and all that. So it's super fascinating. We're social creatures, but we're like networking with each other more than ever without even realizing it on social and otherwise. So I'm a big fan of the relationship part myself, but you know, diving into like, along with providing valuable deal context, engagement data helps sales teams identify stronger pathways into conversations with decision makers, right? Is engagement data something your team tracks today? And if so, how are you doing it? And what are you using it for? And could you be using it for more? Natalie?
Yeah, and it seems like engagement data, we're here just talking about that like one-to-one, like, so how do they engage with someone on your team versus necessarily on like the website? You're all the above.
Yeah.
Cool. I think what really helps for any type of engagement data, right? Whether it's on your website, whether it is personable, it helps prioritize who to go after that day. So, for example, a kind of tactical one is we have closed lost ops who is surging on our website or surging on our pricing page or book a demo page. And then when our AEs are deciding, okay, who should I reach back out to? And then maybe do a more personalized message. Maybe they do have to manually look who's connected for now, but they at least have a list of people who are more actively thinking about Novatic. So I do think that that last piece of getting that really personal connection or message to stand out can be sometimes hard to automate. But the nice thing is about using all these other engagement signals is you can figure out, okay, I have this huge list of accounts I have. Which one should I narrow in on today so I can spend a little more time creating a personalized message? And that's how we're doing it here.
And just like adding to this, just a little more context, like talk about the benefit of like warm introductions. Like, are you layering that in as well, Natalie? And then like, do you prioritize deals based on who in your ICP has relationships with who on the team?
A little bit. We have like right now it's really just manual, and that's probably something we could be doing a better job of, is figuring out what customers do we know maybe knows a prospect, or any of our advisors, who do they know that knows a prospect? That is a little more of that like manual research, but we've definitely seen if we can bring in a warm intro or someone, that 100% helps accelerate the deal.
Yeah, I'd love to hear your point of view, Jake.
Yeah, I think engagement data is something that I think still there's an opportunity for a lot of companies to start understanding what it is and how they can utilize it. I don't think that it's being leveraged properly. But beyond that, those that are, I still think that there's a majority of them are thinking, oh, engagement data and insights is something that my marketing team is supposed to be responsible for, and then feed that information to me. There is a whole slew of amazing tools and technology that can actually put that power in the hands of the sellers, from like companies like Consensus that can help create personalized demos on the fly for their buyers, and that the rep can actually see what part of the demo that their buyer persona was watching, heat maps on like how much time they spent, what content is most important to them. They can go into a conversation with like half of their discovery call already completed for them. It's wild. Or like tools like I've used in the past called Tiled, where you actually get heat maps of where on the content the person was spending time, where they clicked, what pathway they took through the content piece. As simple as like, just instead of sending your document on an attachment, like leverage a deal room where you can place it in there and then see that it's been clicked on, and then how much time is spent. That wouldn't you rather talk to someone who's engaging with your content and wanting to consume your content and have a relevant conversation versus like just blasting everyone and keep following up? It just doesn't make sense.
I personally would, and I'm curious what Jeff's doing for best practice, because I know a minute ago we spoke about cold calling's not dead. I agree. Nothing will ever die. Things will become less effective. Things will become more costly to do, but very few things die. And as a whole, everything is becoming more costly. Hence why relationships are prioritized so much. But I'm curious to hear what you're doing with all of this.
Yeah, like I alluded to it earlier, like we're absolutely doing like warm intros to break into accounts to build pipe on it. And I think like the part 2 of that is it's not just about pipe gen, it's also the execution of a deal. It can be in some cases like disingenuous, right? If you're asking for an intro to an account, you went to this college with this person 15 years ago, right? So it's like, okay, let's get into an evaluation and use the signals to build, right? Like what the use cases, the impact are. But obviously knowing that individual is in that account and you can provide value, right? That's where it also comes into play with think about from like a forecasting perspective of like, hey, we know that we can help solve this problem. We can quantify this problem. We're having a hard time getting to this more senior persona on it. So leveraging the insights and data, whether you're in a forecast call, one-on-one type conversation, or just looking at your pipe from an IC perspective, to map back who knows who and where is like another part of like the secret sauce of like warm intros mid evaluation that could happen. But the biggest thing is just like fitting those conversations and signals that like Jake talked about into a workflow that it doesn't take an army, like where you need to go reach out to an investor and you wait and you hear, oh, I got an email today. Great. Like they don't know them, right? How do I do this in real time and as fast as possible to ultimately determine if I have a play here? And if you don't have a play, you move on to the next account or opportunity or contact that you're thinking about targeting. So I think big picture, like, yeah, signals are kind of like the hot thing right now, as is relationships and driving towards execution and new biz.
Well, yeah, let's break down the numbers though. I'm curious to understand in your relationship driven workflows, what percentage of your opportunities, what's the deal cycle? You know what I'm looking for, and to try to unpack. Is that something that you're tracking, Jeff?
Yeah, like the percentage of
versus 100% cold versus paid, etc.
Yeah, like you always have like your top of funnel and what drives it, but then when you think about what like a rep or BDR can be doing, right? You think about if you segment correctly and you're looking at your core ICP, right? And you start breaking that down. So it's going to vary by book, but in some cases 10 to 20% of your active ICP accounts, if you're an AE, could have a thread right into a conversation. So measuring ultimately based off those individuals, have we done the intros? Have I had my CEO or whatever CFO that knows this individual like help break into that account, and then like attributing back to the source, right, which was broken in by the collective team. It doesn't necessarily matter. In aggregate, matters that you got the pipeline, and then you think about deals in flight, right? Very similar to where you can measure the impact of those conversations that you had someone reach out to help kick the thing forward, or if it's stalled out or whatever it be, multi-thread.
For sure. Natalie, is that something that you all are tracking too? I see you at a bunch of events. How's your team map that out?
Honestly, we just do the super classic from the marketing side. How did you hear about us? And I will say we sell to marketers. So I think like marketers give us that first party attribution, or we'll have our sales team ask, how did you hear about us? If we go to an event, maybe we'll track that list. And then we do have funnels where we can see full on, of leads that came from, let's say, SEO or SEM versus the ones that came from events in person, from referrals. I don't have the exact data on me, but I do know that leads that come from either like referrals or our advisors referring people are some definitely our highest converting leads.
Nice. And Jake, with your clients, are they tracking all of this?
Oh, that's our job to help them figure it out, right? Because most of the time they come to us and we think we're supposed to, or someone told us somewhere we're supposed to, but they don't know how. So we help them implement it. And our personal business is different. Like everything we do tends to be very much inbound based on our networks or relationships or the content that we create. It's kind of a different beast, but 100%. Like if it's not already in place with our clients, and it's typically not the size that we're dealing with, we absolutely, it's one of the first things we help figure out.
Nice. Now, what are the top processes and tools your revenue operations team provides that improve sales performance and decision making, and like things that hit on what we already talked about, like account and contact info, activity history and context, account planning, which accounts to prioritize, previous opportunity context, tools that make sales easier, etc. So like the question is, what are the top processes and tools you all provide to improve sales performance? Jeff.
Nice. Okay. Tools we could talk about all day. I think like anyone can go buy tools, right? And like a proponent of getting the right tech stack and adoption, but really like where like the rubber meets the road, right, is the execution, right, and the structure and process and like pull through on what those tools are. So like just for us specifically, we get 8-9 signals, right, that we surface up across 4 or 5 different vendors. And those range from intent play to relationship play to previous CRM data. And then those are in an IC specific dashboard. So when they start their day, they know exactly what they should be doing. And it's already been segmented off of ICP. So we're not spending time targeting someone that's either not going to be a customer or a bad customer based off of some of the metrics we care about. So as you break that down, like it's very, very easy to then measure, because we're then looking at the conversion of each of those 8 or 9 signals, and we're determining, okay, do we need to fine tune something within the model, right? Is something off here? Is it, the messaging that's not happening, kind of working through the funnel on it? And then ultimately you kind of walk that back into what you're bringing in and pipeline and revenue. So it's really like a systematic way. There we go. Way of ultimately like being data driven in your outbound approach versus just being like, hey, this isn't working, right? And it's like, well, why isn't it working? Let's dig into these sources. And as you start to like parcel out those, you can then start to see trends on an IC level. Maybe someone's doing it better, right? Or this signal is really hot. Maybe we should think about buying another form that's similar, right? That can layer on more intent or more conversations for us to go get. So I think it's just getting really clear on like where you're trying to go. And then what works. And there's going to be stuff that just doesn't work, right? And it's being clear like over a period of time what you're trying to measure, right, on like the upfront to what makes this a successful use of your team's time ultimately.
Natalie, processes and tools.
Yeah, I'll also touch a little high level because we also have like 8 to 10 different intent signals coming from a variety of different places. We do have a Slack channel for each of those. So for example, Clearbit, like website visitors, if they visit our pricing page, we also use our own tool to see if people went through the full interactive demo. We have them all go through Slack. We have all of those signals pump into HubSpot. And then from HubSpot, we can then retarget on the marketing side, as I mentioned, to those LinkedIn ads, as well as create reports. So the reps, we have reps for like our SDR who will get, hey, these are net new accounts that are surging on maybe multiple signals, especially to help prioritize for him and say, okay, these ones I should really go after, as well as reports for AEs. If there's anything signaling for them, I mentioned that like closed lost report before, where if they have an account that closed lost, that's signaling. And then also customer success. Like maybe they want to see if there's been a job change, or, even if like a new user at an account they haven't been introduced to yet is really active on the website. So it's a lot of like Zapier, Slack, hacking it all together. And honestly, I think one of the drawbacks is HubSpot isn't even, it's more on the marketing side since marketing ops set up. And I'd love to maybe get something more in this, like the source of truth where the sales reps live. So still refining the process. And then last thing I'll add too is we do also have a bi-weekly meeting with the sales team that I think is really important, that we talk about different campaigns, these intent signals, what's working well, what's not, propose new ideas, and then also hear maybe if they have ideas on the marketing side, like this signal's working really well, can we put some marketing spend behind it?
I like that. Jake, what are your clients doing, or are you advising your clients to do?
Yeah, I'll take the angle from process here, and like the nerd in me wants to grab a white mark. Like I want to just like whiteboard it all for you out here because like I love this stuff. But the idea here is like you've got to start. Like none of this matters if you don't start from a foundation of a process that's built for this, because otherwise you're just building bigger data problems that you're going to end up with like junk data in, junk insights out. So one of the first things I do with all of my clients, and I advise any startup at any stage or any company at any stage to really think through this process if you haven't done it yet, is first start with the idea of like what is your buyer journey from start to end, right? Like what are the stages that go through that? Then think about, if you want to just isolate the sales stages, okay? If you look at those sales stages, what are the actual activities that have to occur in there, and what are the data points that we need to track? What are the non-negotiable, like minimal data insights that we need to gather from each stage in the journey? Often thinking about like, okay, what are the buyer behaviors that need to occur each of those stages? Okay, so let's map that out by stage. Then as we map that out by stage and we have it all kind of visually understand, looking at it from a perspective of, if we work our way backwards from the kinds of reports, dashboards, and like insights that we want to be able to present one day, what fields do we need to have in our system? What data inputs do we need to have? Okay, now where are we getting that from? As you map that all out, then it gives you a really clear picture. Okay, like how do we build this? And then you build it out in the CRM. We love HubSpot, so like it makes it super easy for us to build this whole process out and automate these different stages and the data inputs, and then make sure you have the right tools in place to fill in the data inputs as you go throughout the buyer journey or the sales journey, so that you can ultimately build the data insights that you want based on the right fields at the right stages in the journey. Like that process will help you ensure that the output is something that you actually can trust. Because I'll tell you, everyone knows 99% of the time when someone from marketing or sales puts a report in front of you, the first reaction you have is like, bullshit. Like, I don't know if I trust it. All right. And that's why people go back to their spreadsheets. And so like, how do we avoid that?
I'm curious, what are the biggest challenges that you see from teams that you work with, Jake, on this, like, or misses, I should say?
Oh man, there's like I think it's both extremes. Either one, they just not caring enough or tracking enough data, not thinking enough, not being intentional enough about the buyer journey, not understanding that buyer journey enough to understand what points of data they need to collect. It's like really not being intimate and documenting what that process looks like. And then you're not collecting the insights. On the other end of this, I think the flip side of it is trying to collect too much information. Mm-hmm. At the beginning, especially like early on in your journey, you don't need to know everything. You don't need every single data point, but you need to know the right data pieces of data. So like you're trying to collect too much insight overcomplicates this process. And I liken it onto like fly fishing. I love fly fishing. If you spend all your time tying your fly, like you're never going to catch a fish. Sometimes you just got to get a hook in the water.
Jeff, what about yourself? Like what are some of the misses teams have with setting a process to do this?
Yeah, I think there's two parts to it. One, like extending on what Jake talked about, it's like you're sitting on a treasure chest of like information within your CRM, but like how do you make it work for you versus just a data entry, right? Validation exercise, which isn't fully like useful, right, for the team typically. So I think first and foremost is like standardizing on like best practices for taking all of the information and making it actionable to do whatever motion you're trying to accomplish. And then I think like where things can fall apart when it comes to the sales ops relationship is that a lot of cases, like it can just be like everything lives in Slack, right? Like, hey, I need this, I need that, right? And you're running a million miles per hour. People are trying to put points on the scoreboard, meaning revenue, right? And then there's really no systemic. This is a hard word. Someone spell it for me. All right, cool. There's no way to do this, right, within like a standardized way. So then everyone's just running around as fast as possible. So one of the things I love that our ops team has done is they work like agile sprints. They're like every 2 weeks, and then every Monday we get an email around like 8:30 from our ops leader that says this is what's on the roadmap, right? And we meet with them every week and we talk through what we're prioritizing. I want to be told no. If you're telling me yes every single time to every single request, like I'm skeptical, because are we really going to be able to prioritize the sales needs, the CS needs, the marketing needs, right? Like the product needs. Like I don't believe that, right? So then quality of work goes down or things slip, they get moved out. So I think working in a way to where it's really clear on what we're trying to accomplish. And then every week we're talking about it, and then it's documented and we see progress. Some stuff might fall out. We might reprioritize, but there's always a little bit of slack within those sprints as things come up and we need to knock something out. So from my overall perspective, it's really like getting clear on what we're trying to accomplish as a collective group, and then like get the flywheel spinning on it, right? And then that goes out to the broader org. So then the team isn't frustrated because something isn't happening when they want it. They know it's happening at mid-May, end of May. Okay, we can live with that, right? As like sales professionals, but it's when like I don't get clarity or insight on what's happening, and then someone else got this because they slacked this individual, and it's like, well, that's not really helpful from like whether it's rev rec or whatever policy you're trying to do or deal you're trying to support. So I think it's just standardizing and getting clear on communication. It's all about communication.
Jeff, how do they pick what to prioritize?
Yeah, so essentially what they're doing is they're meeting with each of like their cross-functional teams, and we're having a conversation, and it's very like, it's not about your team and your needs, it's what the business needs, right? So if, for example, I know that in our CS function that we have a new leader or a new segment that we're standing up, like obviously like there's things that they're going to need that my team might be a little bit more mature on, right? From where we're at. So I think it's just being realistic, but it's really hard typically as like a leader to see what other teams are focused on. You're just thinking about your team, what you're trying to accomplish, things of that nature. So I think it's getting that broader understanding of where everyone's at, and then like having an honest conversation around prioritization and what's best for the business based off where we're at. So I don't think I'm going to get everything, and that's not how I do this. I'm not there to negotiate down to the bone on it. It's being a good teammate and a good partner, knowing that if this other team can do something that's going to ultimately help the company and probably by virtue help sales, so be it. Let's knock it out.
Nice. Natalie?
Yeah, I think kind of to the point of prioritizing and then streamlining. The biggest mistake I've seen is too much data in a bunch of different systems and not pinging people for things that are relevant to them. So that's why I mentioned before having, one report that is for BDRs that's just for net new accounts versus one for AEs that is for their specific accounts. I think so often we buy these platforms and then we just set up a Slack channel that's sends every single lead we get with that intent signal through the Slack channel, and we expect it's on the individual to go through that list, find what applies to them and action on it, when that just becomes a distraction and ultimately they'll probably tune it out, versus figuring how can we figure out what they like to work, what's their system, and getting the information just that they need to them.
As you were saying that, in my head, I'm thinking like too much autonomy without process is just a massive assumption that somebody's going to do it. One, do it first, that they do it, period. And then second, that they do it in a way that's beneficial for whatever the North Star metrics are, right? So there's too much that needs to happen. And it's almost worse to have them do it the wrong way than not do it at all, because you could just pick it up and be like, oh, we need a process for this.
Oh, it's absolutely worse. Like Jared, I worked at a company. I won't say where it was.
My heart was dropping as you were talking about that.
Like exactly. Like you made me feel something too when you said it brought me back to this memory. Like starting at this company, I was just coming in to like lead up sales, and like going along actually with one of the questions that asked me, like one of the most common processes that are broken. I'll tell you, like often territory planning and like comp planning, those are really broken, but territory planning is a big issue. And what they were doing in this company was they were offshoring a lot of the lead research, and then they would send all that information back, and then have sellers. They would shut down the sales floor for 2 weeks out of the year, 2 weeks straight. This was a company that's like over 100, is like 150 million. So you can imagine how much revenue, like that impact that was. And they would have sellers take that data and then manually research like who they were going to go after for 2 weeks and create a priority list of 300 accounts for not the whole year, just for that quarter. And it blew my mind how manual of a broken process that was, and how much revenue impact they were making. I just don't understand how some of this process is like still being done. Insane.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of early stage stuff. So anyway, let's, going on this, tell me about areas that you've seen sales and revenue operations teams commonly underperform, or have lack of resources. What would you like to see more of, Natalie?
Yeah, I think what I hear so often, and this is going to surprise no one, is like marketing and sales have different goals, so they're not aligned, and then they're just going in different directions. Kind of what I was talking about before with if you aren't working at the same signals, someone's working over here, someone's working here, it's not aligned. I think what I want to see more of, and I'm going to come out to the marketing side, so I'm going to ask my marketing professional to do this. I'm not going to insult sales and take the easy way out. I want to see marketing more ask sales if their ideas are like bad, or if they shouldn't do them, or why they're not doing them. I've seen so often marketers will pitch something to sales or say something, and then sales will be like, okay. And they might not give like a very emotional reaction either way. And then sales doesn't end up doing it. And then marketing gets mad. They're like, sales isn't following up my leads, or they're not taking my intent signal seriously. They're not actioning on it. But rather than just asking them to do that, they start this conversation. And I try to do this a lot. I'm like, this might be a dumb idea, or this might be bad, or why won't this work? Or like, tell me if another campaign didn't work. Tell me if my leads were bad and why. I think just starting the conversation with feedback then lets you go to the core of what is working and get aligned, versus just being so frustrated. They're like, why aren't they doing this thing? Or why aren't my data, versus asking them like, why is inputting that data really annoying?
Jeff, you want to pick that up?
Yeah, it's similar to my prior answer. It's all about prioritization, right? Like everyone leans on the product team for having the roadmap for the company, but you need to have a roadmap for your go-to-market. And part of that is like driven by ops, right? And it's taking stakeholder feedback. So we talked about how we do things on a weekly basis, but we got to also think about it on the quarter, right? So, and when you think about quarterly planning, that could be more encompassing of tools, right? And processes, right? Measurements that you're trying to incorporate. And those things can be done right at a certain level, and then you kind of forget the individual and like what's realistic, also like what's the best thing for driving the outcome that you're looking for. So much of that is like being ruthless in the conversations when it comes to what matters most, but getting feedback from the field, right? Off of like what they're seeing that's working. It's easy to look at the data, right? High level, but what's the customer saying? And does that tell us that there's potential? And I'm thinking about this through the lens of like, right, you launched a new motion because you're struggling with pipe gen, for example, right? So whether it's a new tool or process that you laid out, like the best feedback you're ever going to get are from the people that are doing it. And then connecting that ultimately to a broader roadmap, tying back to what's going to happen over the quarter, whether it's enablement, a new feature, whatever, product going live internally, to then align with the individual and what they need to do on a given day. Right, making it very easy to ultimately execute. So I think it's all about prioritization, expectations, and again, communication.
I love that. Now, Jake has probably seen a dozen teams in the last month.
In the years, man. That's why I have all these emotional scars.
So dozens in the last years, but like, let's talk 2024. What are you seeing, Jake?
I'm going to borrow from a phrase that my friends Sangram and Brian Brown over at GTM Partners say all the time. I love this point, especially now in this like the market conditions that it's in, is when you're noticing the numbers are not getting hit. I'll tell you, dare I say 100% of the time, I'll say 99% of the time, it's not a marketing problem, it's not a sales problem. It's not a revenue operations problem. It's a go-to-market problem that they're dealing with. And the issue here is that they're just not working together as a go-to-market team or machine to solve this. That too many orgs and too many teams are operating in silos, trying to hit their metrics, not thinking about what we're actually doing here every day. Why the hell do we get up and come here, and why are we not operating together? And if you are not at a stage where the CEO can lead your go-to-market motion and have this overarching view of it, then you need to have a leader take that responsibility. But you need to have sales, marketing, customer success, revenue operations all together, thinking about how are we solving for this? How are we measuring this? How are we planning for this? How are we executing this? Otherwise, you're just going to keep tripping over each other and pointing fingers.
How do you get them together? You just throw them in a room and you give them the same goals. Like I hear the evangelism, but I want
to. Yes.
Yeah.
You do get them all together, and you do have this conversation of like, what are we solving for? You do narrow it down to similar goals or the same goals. You set the sights on the one thing and you say, okay, for example, CS and sales, so many years have we spent time over here on CS worrying about NPS and CSAT, and sales worrying about a revenue number. Why not just focus on net revenue retention and gross revenue retention and align together that overall revenue number, right? And get marketing involved in that and actually tying to that revenue number as well. Once we start focusing our efforts on the same outcomes, then magically we start moving in the same directions. But I think we still see people measuring and operating just detached from one another,
disparately or silos. What kind of goal setting system like helps enable this? Like let's give these people here something to take with them.
So I've been a fan of like an OKR process.
Yeah.
Like I think that's a great process. I've been a part of organizations that use like the Amazon approach of OP1s and OP2s. I'll tell you, if you're not ready for that, don't even get close to it, because it'll drain you. Like you'll have to write like novels worth of planning, but it's very powerful. I think you start simple and with a system that really gets everyone aligned, in an OKR system where I think works really, really well. And you start from the top, it starts at the C level. Once those OKRs are defined, then the first, the next level and the next level all have to think about how theirs roll up and roll up and roll up. And so like nobody has an outcome that's not impacting or relating to that of their counterparts and the overall goals.
Natalie and Jeff, do you all have like a goal setting system that everyone's aligned with?
Also OKRs, not surprisingly. I just say biggest thing there too. Only other thing I'll add is don't set too many OKRs. I've seen this happen so many times when you're like, okay, so we'll have these 3 main ones from leadership, and then everyone else has 5 to 7.
No,
that's too many. So stay focused and prioritize. Like we usually do 3-ish. So I like OKRs, but just don't let them become a task list. Make sure it really stays higher level.
Yep. OKRs. Similar, like lesson learned since we're going that direction, is also not accepting OKRs that you can't control. So if you're waiting on ops, for example, to complete something, a rollout or whatever, but you're trying to generate XYZ pipeline or revenue from it, right? Like own that OKR, but when the time is right. It's probably one of my biggest lessons learned on it. But as far as then tying the OKRs back, right, there's got to be a way. Like it's great that we had this exciting like launch this quarter, right, and we're looking at all the OKRs, but what is like the follow on to that, and what's your motion, right, for bringing those OKRs to life, and when and where and who and what? So there's definitely like a cadence and a deeper conversation on like your operating rhythm cross-functionally. That's going to help ultimately make or break those OKRs versus making it like a check the box OKR or like a wow, this was a drastic impact that led to all these great outcomes for the business.
Yeah, I think I read somewhere you shouldn't have more than 5 objectives. Anyone who's here, it's okay to have 2. Like if you're executing out of it, two is much better than 5. If you can't do half of them, you're not going to be able to do any of them.
I started capping my teams at 3, because what happens is, like they were both mentioning, is your counterpart, your peers start putting tasks on you too, and before you know it, those 3 turn into all the projects associated with all the other outcomes tied to all your cross-functional orgs. So keep it like that was really, really wise feedback from Natalie.
Yeah. Diving into operations a bit more here. Should ops teams limit their focus to maintaining data and processes? Or would you prefer they also take an active role in identifying, evaluating, and integrating new technologies? Do we throw tech under ops or not? Natalie?
I think ops has to be involved with more than just being the behind the scene data people, because ultimately how you input, like how you set up a field might be depending on what ABM campaign you're launching or what initiative sales is going after. So as far as like should ops set the accounts, I think it should probably be in conjunction. Ops should have a say. They should have some data that they pull and some ideas around, this is the data we're seeing our ICP work, but then again have that very blunt conversation with sales around what's working, what's not. So I don't know if they have to lead it, but I definitely think they have to be a part of the conversation, because it's also very frustrating from a data perspective when someone just tells you what to do and you don't get to be involved with the conversation of why you're setting it up that way.
Yeah, Jeff, what do you think?
Yeah, there's definitely a role. Like ultimately, the success of new tools is going to come down to like scoping out, right, where this lives within the stack and how we bring it to life. So like, there's a heavy role that they play, and then I think where ops leads those things is like, are we talking about something that's going to drive effectiveness, right, from the specific team? Like, is this something within like the overall CRM or an extension of the CRM that's going to provide, right, like improvements that like, is more or less an ops driven conversation? I wouldn't expect like another team to own that, right? Whereas if marketing is looking towards buying something that's more like market engagement, things of that nature, like that makes sense. Ops should be heavily engaged, but like there's like SMEs for those individual solutions that more or less have that experience, but they're heavily involved one way or the other. But like where things come together is making sure that they're in those conversations, and where these things go sideways is when they're not.
What about you, Jake?
Yeah, I mean, it's been said, but I won't be as gentle about it. Like, absolutely, yes, it has to be. I think if you're not doing it, you're old school, and you're just, I think, exacerbating the problem. I think that's why the whole revenue operations term has started to become more and more broadly used, because the siloed sales operations and marketing operations caused some of its challenges, but operating together as an operations or revenue operations function helps solve for this problem, right? Before I went off and joined Adam and Dale in Revenue Reimagined, I did not accept any role unless I could bring my RevOps team with me as my first hires. No chance. I would not do that.
Yeah.
Before I hired anyone, before I went after my first like AEs, if I didn't have this rockstar RevOps team in place, that I knew that was the foundation of success for everything else I rolled out. Because like I don't want my sellers wasting time, like we talked about that one exercise at the other company, trying to figure out where they need to be spending. That's just not what they're there to do. Like I want sellers selling. I want sales development doing sales development. And I want them to have the context and some of the research that they do behind the accounts that they're bringing to the table. But I do not want them doing that function. There are way more like skilled people with more resources to be able to provide that in a much better way. And if we're putting that burden on sellers, it's a very expensive exercise.
Imagine ops owning like the CRM, but not the other stuff. And people just like plugging stuff into the CRM, like adding sales. We know sales is adding the duplicate records. That goes without saying. Marketing is adding like all these intent points that haven't yet been mapped in the CRM, but they're going somewhere without a name. I could just imagine like all of this happening.
Jared, can I add an anecdote?
Yeah.
Anecdote to this, because like what you just said is like I had a really interesting conversation with a very tenured senior engineer of Boeing like a couple of days ago. Just happenstance conversation, and the guy's telling me he won't fly anymore. We're talking about someone who literally led global engineering for the most prominent like flight company, aerospace company in the world. He won't get on a plane anymore. He road trips everywhere in the United States. Why? Because they now outsource each part of their operations to different manufacturing across all over the country and all over the world, and they don't do it under one roof anymore. And now, what are you seeing in the news all the time about planes falling apart in the air, right? Like it blows my mind that like if we don't keep these operational tasks in one place, like we're accepting the risks that come with that, and sometimes those risks just aren't worth the consequence.
Yeah. How are you going to de-silo the humans and the goals and not de-silo the technologies? All right. We have time for one more question. And there's a couple questions that came in. We'll share them with the speakers and we could write a note later. But what big change, and I'm excited about this one. What big changes do you all anticipate making with your sales strategies or revenue ops this year? Are these changes being driven by sales or ops? I'm going to ask Natalie to start.
I already touched on this, so I'll answer quickly. I think the biggest thing is just we are all busier and there's so much noise, just making sure to really prioritize that the person at the right signal, like right time when someone's ready to get a signal, and the right person, we're just sending it to the BDR and the AE versus just having a million signals everywhere. And I think it's combined. It's not like one person who's driving it. We all recognize it's inefficient when this isn't a streamlined process.
Jake?
I think I'm going to just go something foundational, and maybe just the world in which I operate now with the clients at the stages they're in. But foundationally, the way I operate with every one of my clients is making sure they have their data and their process system set up from the ground up every single time. To think first from what do we want to be able to track, understand, and see, and then how are we going to build and plan for that so that we don't get to that mark when we're at 10 million, 20 million, 50 million ARR, 100 million ARR, and then say, oh, we can't track all this stuff and blow up all of our systems to rebuild. So what I would say is, even though it's not a novel idea, start from the ground up and build things right the first time so that you don't have to dismantle everything when you're going a million miles an hour.
And then Jeff, bring it home.
Bring it home. Yeah, I think for us, like where we're at in our maturity from, like, I'll keep it specific to Jen. I've been talking about that all day. So we have like 8 or 9 signals, right? Those are relatively mature. Our like pipeline allocation of what reps are producing versus marketing is in a good spot. Same with revenue. So like my ops leader essentially came and said, hey, I think there's like 2 other signals that we can layer on here that are, one around fundraising data, right? And bringing that in to where reps can have more insight on who's raising rounds and who knows who and things of that nature, which obviously there's less fundraising happening right now. So like the signal maybe might not be as wide as it was a couple of years ago, but nonetheless, like how do we sprinkle on additional ones that can then connect back to not just giving it to a BDR to go reach out to you, but tying in on SLA. So what's our response time when we get a signal? Are we responding in 24 hours, 8 hours, 2 hours? How many touches are we doing? Are they valuable touches? Are we incorporating things like gifting, things of that into the overall motion? What does that look like? And then I think part 2 of this, which is like, bigger exercise, but it's taking all the signals that we have and then combining it with other signals to make it even stronger, mostly like applying relationship intelligence on top of intent to then be like, okay, like this is interesting because now I have like way more of a graph of like the story of what they're looking for mixed with who knows who. So then my messaging is even more compelling versus just, hey, you downloaded this or that, or you attended this, or there's like accumulation of things that you've done in the past. So essentially crossing up signals and like getting even more insight into it and then adding additional ones.
I love it. Thank you all for coming today. Thank you, Affinity, for sponsoring this. Jeff, how could people learn more about Affinity?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. We'll also have a follow-up on this from our team, which is a little bit of context on Affinity, but appreciate everybody joining today. Absolutely terrific getting to spend time with you all. And yeah, find me on LinkedIn.
Thank you all for coming. I learned a lot. Have an awesome day, everybody. And thank you again.